Alright, so I want to make a topic about, it's been a while, but I want to make a topic about, like, all this, like, social justice stuff that's been going on the last, like, few years. And when I'm seeing it I've been following a lot of arguments on and off in, like, 3 years, the last 2 years, and what I've seen is a lot of arguments that don't seem to kind of miss the, where all this stuff comes from. It's like missing the proper, context for where a lot of these ideas are rooted in. The common thread, it all, the common thread in all this is it all comes back from, it all goes back to, I mean, some people have said it, and I'll say it again. It comes back to, what do you call it? Pretty much, Marxist communist ideology. A lot of people who try to argue against, like, things like, white privilege or systemic racism, or, we need to, we need true equality or whatever, like, this isn't true equality, which is like, anyway, here's the thing. It all comes from pretty much all these theories that are in currently in the academic field, mostly like sociology, that are derived from Marxist, like, ideology. That's what it is. It's like pretty much class warfare. You have the proletariat, the working class, and the bourgeoisie. I'm probably not pronouncing that right, but the second one being the ruling class, or those who are in power. And then that's what it boils down to. It's just become a little bit more complex, and as I guess the feminists like to say, intersectional. The whole intersectional theory and shit, and it just made it a bit more complicated. But that's basically what it boils down to. That's a common thread among all that stuff. As far as I can tell, the whole race thing seems to be the biggest version of that right now. I could talk about that, but that's not really the point. The point of what I'm saying, again, is that these have roots. All these ideas have roots in Marxist ideology. The whole class struggle, conflict struggle between one class and the other. On this base level, it's you have one class that's advanced and one that's not. The one that's not has all the power, all the resources. I don't. And I don't. When I see from a lot of people who are like anti-social justice or whatever, they use a lot of counter arguments. But the thing is, they do it in ways that don't really address these arguments in its proper context, in terms of at least where it comes from. I think that's why a lot of times, even though I think that a good portion of these arguments are good by themselves, the quality of them are good, I think that's why they get shut down, or they have gotten shut down a lot in the past, by people who understand, or at least like mired in, the actual like Marxist ideologies, or the derivatives of, I think that's why they shut them down, because it's like, well, basically what it is, like those who already, counter the arguments being laid forth are already viewed as, either part of the ruling class or supportive of. So then when they throw these arguments out, and by the way, they don't actually address, the theories that, that a bunch of them don't actually address the theories that the proponents of, the social justice causes throw out. It's like, those same proponents then end up saying, oh, you don't really want to understand, you don't really understand, but they just shut you down is because, you just want to shut down discussion, and because, and you're only serving to further the status quo. Does that make sense what I'm saying so far? It's already, to them, it's already, because the way the because the way their ideologies are set up, there's already a set structure of ruling class, non-ruling classes, or class or classes, and it's because it's already that way to them. Any arguments that dissidents or dissenters, whatever, make against those things is they're going to be dismissed, because they're already seen as part of just to further this part of the status quo. And any arguments, counter arguments to that, that there's this sort of status quo, like oppression or whatever, they're going to be seen as just arguments that further, one way or another, serve to further or keep the status quo alive. And it's like, that's one reason why it gets dismissed, I think. And also, again, because a lot of arguments don't actually address where, at least the basic theory that these new arguments come from. Again, it all comes from pretty much like Marxist theory. I'm not going to say I understand it in its entirety, but from what I have read, I get the gist of it. I get enough to understand why things have been going on the way they have for a while. And so I'm going to explain it. So, I'm sure there are a lot of people who already know, but for those who don't, or, at least, and just because I need to explain to lay out the argument I'm going to present, is basically the way it is like, in context of the two classes, you have the working class, the proletariat, and then the bourgeois. Again, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, but you know what I mean, the ruling class. And the problem with that is, in that context, you have the working class. One of the reasons the working class is disadvantaged in comparison to the bourgeois, whatever, and why they are also oppressed is because they don't have the resources necessary to, how do I say it, to really be happy, or be realize their destiny or whatever, or be to really be free of to really be free to be themselves. It's a weird way of saying it, and I've read it that way, and it's really weird. It's almost poetic, but the point of that is they're not really free to be who they are, because whether they realize it or not, they don't actually have the resources. They don't actually have the resources necessary to do it. And it's like, well, okay. My next thought would be, well, what are the resources necessary to do that? And the thing is, that's what it is. That's where the oppression comes from. It's those who already have them, being in the rich class. They're the ones who have those resources, or most of them, or all of them, or whatever. They have the resources necessary to at least be closer to reaching that personal fulfillment, or being really happy, or really realize who their true selves are. It's just weird. It's just weird language. It's weird use of words that I understand, basically, but it's weird, because that's your true self is that's kind of really nebulous term that can be interpreted in many ways. But anyway, that's the point is, and as far as I read, it was mostly economic, but I think that's where it all started to change. Once you started throwing in all, once it transferred into sociology and sociological concepts, once those had become further developed, you had things like conflict. Well, I don't remember if conflict theory is actually really a sociological concept, but you had things like critical theory, critical race theory, things like that. And it's like, okay, and then feminist theory, standpoint theory, intersection, all that stuff, you know, there's still that core, you know, class warfare going on between the ruling and the non-ruling classes. You know, that is still the common link, but that's, you know, it expanded from there, and it turns to all kinds of things like, you know, racist attitudes, sexist attitudes, stereotypes, microaggressions, what else? Implicit bias, that's a big one. It's implicit bias against disadvantaged groups. I've mostly heard race and women, but, you know, against disadvantaged groups. I'm probably missing one, but, you know, you see what I'm saying? It's like it wasn't just economic, and now you have that, and then you have all this other stuff like class, race, all these other factors that are thrown into the mix. And then now it's not so much about like actual resources that you can gain in the world. I mean mostly tangible and whatever. You know, it turns into things that are more a little bit more complex, maybe a little bit more subtle, like emotions or perceptions or stereotypes. Those are, you know, and then thoughts, like subconscious thoughts. Those are, you know, a lot tougher to address, and that's why I think that's where part of the problem comes from when it comes to making substantial counters to these arguments, because it's a lot harder to address subconscious thoughts, because I mean, how the hell do you do that, right? No, I'm sure there are ways, but, you know, for the average person, that's a tall order. But anyway, basically, yeah, in all of this, you still have that basic ruling class here, oppressed class down there. And now it's to the point where it's not just about, I mean, you could say it never really was about like overt oppression, but now you still have a ruling system in place, and people are still being oppressed because they are being prevented either, you know, consciously or subconsciously from getting the resources necessary to, you know, realize their full potential as human beings. It's still vague, you know, nebulous phrase that can be interpreted in multiple ways, but, you know, that's the gist of it. And because of that, they're not on equal footing. You know, that's where all that whole "we're not truly equal" comes from, and all this stuff. You know, that's what's so sort of insidious about it. You know, for lack of a better word, you know, because there is some sort of captivating element to that argument, you know, the base argument, and it's like, I think that's what draws a lot of people towards that argument, towards that side, you know. But anyway, now that I've laid that part out, the next thing I want to say is that I think it's also why it's so hard to kind of like address it in the, how do I put it, more common, like, layman ways, almost, and, you know, then that a lot of anti-SJW people do, especially on YouTube. It's not all of them, but it's very common, and I see it, and it's just like, as much as I like these arguments, it's not going to work, because, you know, you're not really arguing against it in its proper context, and it has, you know, these things are in the academic institutions. They have been for years. You know, those are, you know, as at least one other YouTuber said it, it's been, you know, that's what's changing the laws. That's what's, you know, captivating the minds of young college students. That's what's going about, changing, or that's what's being put in the media, in some ways, that's what's garnering a lot of the strong social influence, for what it's worth. As much as I and probably a lot of the people don't agree with the theories and arguments put forth, and are maybe somewhat skeptical of some of the scientific claims, or just academic arguments put forth. The fact of the matter, for what it's worth, they still do have a lot of academic backing, and that's part of the problem. You're not really going to change anything, and I'm not the first person to say that. You're not really going to change anything by arguing around it. You have to argue those things, and it's countering with your own personal experience is not going to work. For example, I saw a video the other day or so, or I've seen a bunch of videos here and there about the whole white privilege thing, and I still see to this day arguments that try to counter it with, oh well, I'm white, I grew up this way, I didn't have sources in my mouth, I had to work for everything I own, I was born in the ghetto just like black people I know, blah blah blah. So you tell me my white privilege is, a lot of whites don't do this. It's not even, it's the thing. And I've seen in response to that every now and then, what I used to see was people saying it's not about individuals, whites. It's not even about a summation of individual whites that didn't grow up that way. It's not about what you didn't have growing up. That's not the point, and I understand now that that's not the point, as much as I still don't agree with the concept, because now I have a greater understanding of the context which it comes from, but to those people who still argue, hey, I'm white and I grew up this way, I didn't have this privilege that you're talking about, that's not the point of what they're saying. The point of what they're saying is rooted in this ideology, or in Marxist philosophy that goes back to, there's more stuff to it, but yeah, that's where it's rooted from. It has to do with, because the way you're seen, you're part of the ruling class, you're white, you're seen as, you're closer to reaching, to being seen as, like, how do I put it, like a normal person or whatever, and if you can understand that context, someone who, as a white person, you're closer to reaching your full potential as a person. If you're a minority or a person of color, it's harder for you because you're perceived differently, and that makes it harder for you to get the resources you need as a person of color to get those resources. That's what it is, on a basic level. I'm dumbing it down, but on the basic level, that's what it is, and countering it with just anecdotes of your life as a white person, that's not going to debunk where that that the core, like the root of that argument. It's not going to, or even talking about just other arguments that that try to counter it. It's not going to, unless you address the context where that comes from, the root context. It's not going to really debunk that argument. And unless, and the thing is, academic opponents of these of theories like this, they're not going to recognize you. You're not going to recognize your counter arguments. As much as I agree with them, as much as I think some arguments are actually really, really good the way they're laid out and really valid, I think a lot of them are actually valid, but they're not going to, unless you argue it in the context of which it comes from. They're not going to recognize counter arguments like those. So I want to throw that out there. I'm not saying these people shouldn't make these kind of arguments, shouldn't make them. I'm not saying they're bad at them. I'm not saying it at all. I'm just saying after a certain amount of time of following back and forth, arguments, proposal arguments, counter arguments, blah blah. They're not. It's not solving anything. And it's not just because you have different sides that may not want to listen to each other. It's not just because of that. It's also because it's in these theories are not being addressed like at their root, or at least in their own context. They're not being addressed in that way. You have to take it a step further. You have to go deeper into it, and then actually try to counter that, the roots, where these come from, the context in which they come from. Anyway, so which is what I'm going to attempt to do right now in this video, at least insofar as what I understand about the basic theories, the basic ideas of the ruling class and then the oppressed class. Here's what I don't understand, right? So, first of all, you have the reason I understand. Basically, the reason the working class, again, they're oppressed, disadvantaged, at most oppressed, because they don't have, the resources necessary to realize their true potential as people. Not really free, because they're actually stuck in a system where they don't have the resources, and whether they know it or not, they're not actually free because of that. They can't actually be who they really are, even if they think they do, because or even if they think they can, because they haven't been on an equal playing field from the start, because the resources aren't the same. They're not equally distributed. Those resources are what you need to get closer to realizing your true potential, which is up here, and the ruling class is right over there somewhere, so they're closer to reaching it than the working class, who don't have that. So they can't actually really be happy or be free to really be themselves like the ruling class can. That's where that comes from, insofar as I understand it. Now, here's what I don't understand. Right? At what point, well, first of all, at what point do you account for any one individual interpretation of this, or even as a group, a class interpretation of this, if you want to go there? Because the working class, here's the thing with the working class, right? It has been done, it has been explained, in here and there, what disadvantages certain disadvantaged groups have, what lack of resources they might have, it has, real well, it has, but whether you agree with it or not. But the thing is, at what point do you decide that the lack of resources in question are what causes them to be oppressed? At what point do you decide that? And at what point do you decide, or do the ruling class, get to decide whether they're oppressed or not? And it sounds crude, and it might sound like I'm saying, at what point, do they get to decide subjectively, that they're being oppressed or disadvantaged or whatever. I don't mean, it's not as simple as I'm saying it. What I mean is, here's the thing, right? These theories have an academic backing, right? They're rooted in an old philosophical, context. May also has an economic context to it, and they've been developed over time, in certain scientific spaces. Well, mostly the sociological, the social sciences, mostly sociology. It has an academic backing to it, and then there have been studies based off of it that, at least claim to utilize a scientific method. I've seen studies that have been shown to not follow the scientific method, in those fields. But there's at least the idea that they do, And here's the thing, not everyone's a scientist, right? That's obvious. Not everyone has a good understanding, or a well enough understanding, or any understanding of the scientific method. That's a little less obvious. And I'm not going to say all disadvantaged people, all poor people, all working class people lack this, but I mean, you have to expect that some of them don't, or some of them don't have the time to understand these scientific processes and how to understand in full academic context these theories and ideas and stuff like that. Which is why I see, proponents who are, once they've been informed, basically once they've been informed that they're oppressed or whatever, and you see, they have theories and whatever to back these claims up, at least try to support these claims. You have more proponents who, a little bit more lower on the oppression scale, whatever, more disadvantaged, and they're like, yeah, you know what, we are, and then blah blah blah. But you're gonna have some of these people, but then you might have people who may not seem like they're that poor or whatever, or that disadvantaged, and they make arguments that are clearly in support of where all this these claims come from, but they don't demonstrate any scientific or an understanding of the scientific and philosophical, academic, all these elements of where these arguments come from. And for lack of a better term, again, those people fall into the realm of sheep. That's not to insult their intelligence, but what I'm saying is that is one way in which they're going to be perceived, because they don't understand the full context of where all these arguments come from, which goes back to what I'm saying before. So here's the thing, right? Here's what my main issue is. People who are disadvantaged. Let's take at least poor people, for example, right? People who have to work, people who are constantly struggling financially, have to work, or to get themselves out of troubling situations, or keep themselves out of troubling situations. Whatever that may be. If they have to get work to just be able to eat, be able to provide for their kids. They have to work so they can get the money to move out of the ghetto or something, if that's what they want to do, if they want to better their lives, or they want to move to another country and better their lives. They have to make certain decisions. That takes a lot of personal time, effort, and energy. And here's the thing. They're not going to be focused. They're going to be directing a lot of their time, money, energy, or whatever on those things, on making certain decisions, taking action, instead of fucking reading, combing through studies, or learning certain scientific processes, or things about social sciences, having some sort of understanding about the world and wanting to change the world. They're not going to be. You can't expect them to be primarily focused on that. They're going to be primarily focused on survival, basically, and taking care of themselves and bettering their personal situations. The reason I bring this up is because that's actually an important factor in how much they understand about the whole academic element to all of this. Reading up on these things, or working, whatever. All this takes time and energy. You can't, to put it crudely, there's an economics of choice going on there. Whatever more time and energy you spend on one thing, you sacrifice for another. And people who are more working class and poorer, they tend not to spend as much time, or they might not even have the luxury of engaging in these academic, endeavors to uncover these things or to understand these things, because they're more focused on freaking paying the bills or whatever. You get what I'm saying? So right then and there, that's to say whether they have the capability to understand these things in the first place. The academic resources necessary to understand, educational resources necessary to understand these concepts. That's assuming they do in the first place, or they don't. Or just not. Whether they do or not. So those people who make those choices, it's a little bit less likely, it's a little bit harder to expect them to decide for themselves whether they're oppressed or not, because they're probably not even thinking about that shit. And then here we come next to the educational part of it, or academic part of it, whatever. Their capability to understand these things, if one of the resources that these people have is, are lacking our educational resources, right? If that's one of the reasons why it's hard for them to get jobs, why it's harder for them to, they're not perceived as smart or whatever, blah 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 blah. If that is one of the resources, that they're lacking, and that's why they're in this oppressed status to begin with. Here's the problem: you need a certain amount or level of educational understanding. So you need a certain amount of educational resources to be able to understand these concepts in the first place, let alone agree with them, disagree with them, attempt to further explain, go into the field of sociology and further explain them as an academic, as a sociologist, whatever, expand upon concepts like these, and then try to figure out how you can, start changing the world, change policies or whatever. That encompasses, to do this encompasses, at the very least some sort of, some amount, a few years of study to like 20 years or so. And you have, then turn that into a career. That's a whole lot of time and effort, and then, mental rigor. That if there are people who are lacking a certain amount of educational resources to begin with, here's the thing: they're not going to have the amount of resources at the time in which you're trying to make these certain people who come from, say college students who came out of these sociological fields, and now they're trying to enact changes in the social world. They're going to have access to educational resources that the people they're trying to change the world for don't have. So they're not, even if they end up agreeing with you that they're, in this sort of oppressed status, they're not going to have, a full, as much of an understanding as you do, because you've had the privilege of having those, being able to study those things in an academic level, and then, which goes back to what I don't understand. Here's the problem. At what point do, at least in terms of educational resources, do these, disadvantaged people in question have, at what point would they be able to determine for themselves whether they're oppressed or not? I'm not saying it should be, that, determining whether you're oppressed or not is just subjective. That there's no, you can't, whether someone thinks they are or not, that there's not some sort of factual basis that could be, override what a person who will be designated in that position thinks either way and the other. I'm not saying it can't still be fact whether you think a person exists or not. What I am saying is, here's the thing, science doesn't exist in itself. Does that make sense? Like, there are people who engage in these processes, people who have the resources necessary and the whether it's educational resources, mental capability, academic understanding, whether they have all these necessary resources to go into these fields, comprehend what's coming out of these fields to begin with, ideas and theories, on a certain level. That all depends on what an individual is capable of understanding and then doing from there on out. If the people in question don't have any of these resources, right? it's going to be hard. Again, it's going to be harder for them to comprehend these things, and then it's going to be harder for them to, you can't expect them to get into these fields and then contribute anything to it. Or contribute to anything against it. It's how do I put it? To engage in any sort of intellectual discussion or scientific debates or anything of the sort, that requires human participants, obviously, but human participants who have the understanding and resources necessary to do so. And part of what furthers the scientific process is being able to constantly test theories that are put forth. Obviously you test them to see if they still hold any weight after, if there's any consistency after constant trial and error. That's kind of where part of the having different perspectives and different theories come from. You're gonna have to need that, and that's why you also that's why you need people in those fields, right? Obviously. Here's the thing though. So that's part of what allows these theories to advance, is being tested against other theories, or just tested against scrutiny, or being put up to scrutiny, and if people who don't have access to these things in the first place, or been designated in this sort of disadvantaged class or group, then they're not. They can't contribute one way or the other, or they can't be expected to contribute one way or the other to the betterment, of furthering goals that are, or furthering political and social changes that are being made in their favor in the first place. That's a problem I'm having. That's what I'm not understanding. At what point, what do you expect these people to do? Do you expect them to follow those who have the privilege of understanding these things on that educational level in the first place? All the while missing the full academic context in which these things come from. Do you expect them to take the time to once those in the position of at least understanding these things, to try and make changes for those who don't understand these things, once those people in question start to gain access to those resources, at least on the educational level, and being able to actually go into these science fields, understand these theories that allowed them, just say for the sake of it, presumably allowed them to get the things they didn't have in the first place. Okay, so what's supposed to happen once they have them? What happens when some of these people end up then looking at these things and saying, coming up with different other explanations in the future, on an academic level or scientific level? That's the weird thing. First of all, that might change, but then, and then people have a different outlook on these things. And then second, it's the problem with this. You have one group of people who they might have the best of intentions, and they might be trying to make changes for the betterment of other people who are disadvantaged, or who they think are disadvantaged at least. But these disadvantaged people don't have a lot of control. They don't have a lot of agency in the situation themselves, because they might not even have the resources necessary to determine for themselves that they're in this troubling position in the first place. They might see that, yes, they're not on an equal level compared to some other group in some way, but that doesn't necessarily translate to them being oppressed in the specific way that's been laid out to them or presented to them. It's not necessarily the same thing. And if they don't have the capability to understand the reasons necessary to be able to understand that, then they're not really deciding for themselves what their status is. Are they? Is that anything I've been saying making sense in the first place? That's why I don't understand. That's what I don't understand about this. The root of all these theories, from when I understand as much as I do about the Marxist perspective, the people in question, the working class, may not have the resources necessary to even, comprehend that level of, that argument that they are in a certain status, and they may not even have the resources necessary to, to really think critically about it and decide for themselves whether they are in that status or not. It's like, at what point are these people capable of determining that? And I think that's where some of those claims from the opposing side that say, by telling people the constant oppression, telling them they don't have any agency, I think that has some validity to it, in the context of they don't have the agency. They may not have the agency required to fully, decide that they are in this position in the first place. At least that is what I'm seeing. That is what I think the basic class argument against the working class, about the working class, implies. So anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there. And I don't want to ramble. I feel like I was a little bit rambly, but I think I got my point across. Everyone has any thoughts on how they can address that, just like comment or whatever, or let me know. I felt the need to just make a point about it, because man, it just had me thinking for a while. Anyway, I'm probably not really gonna make a lot of videos on this subject, because it's pissing me. Like all this stuff that's been going on the last few years is pissing me off, and it's just too much. And it doesn't. Yeah, it makes me think, and that's one thing I can appreciate. But it doesn't. These issues, like all the stuff that's going on, they don't actually do anything for my life, personally, in all the other ways. It doesn't do anything positive for me. It just makes me feel negative. And I'm not really trying to feel that if I don't have to. So I like putting myself in a position, so to speak. So yeah, I probably won't make a lot of videos like this. I just wanted to lay some thoughts out there, because it got me confused. So yeah, that's all I had to say.